The Gospel of John presents a completely different Jesus than the one we've seen in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In John, we find a Jesus who speaks in long theological discourses, openly declares his divinity, and performs miracles primarily as signs of his power. John turns Jesus into a pre-existent divine being, radically altering the narrative of his life and teachings. But was this how Jesus really saw himself? Or is John's gospel another theological invention developed decades later? Well, in today's New Testament for Skeptics video, we will thoroughly examine John, the last and most theological of the Gospels, and we'll uncover how it reinvents Jesus into a divine figure. As in our other videos, first let's discuss who wrote this book of the New Testament. John's Gospel is traditionally attributed to John, the son of Zebedee, one of Jesus' closest disciples. But scholars overwhelmingly reject this claim for the same reason as the other Gospels. The Gospel itself never names who the author is. It's written again in highly refined Greek, unlikely for a fisherman from Galilee. And the first attribution to John only appears in the late 2nd century. Instead, the book refers to an anonymous, beloved disciple, a mysterious figure who supposedly witnessed key events. But if this person were truly an eyewitness, why does John's gospel contradict the earlier account so dramatically? The simplest answer is that John was written by a later Christian community that developed its own theological interpretation of Jesus. Let's explore further and see what evidence we can find of this claim. Now, unlike Mark, Matthew, and Luke, which portray Jesus as a Jewish prophet and teacher, John presents Jesus as a pre-existent divine being who existed before time itself. John starts off his gospel with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's John 1:1. Later in John chapter 8, Jesus says of himself, "Before Abraham was, I am." And in John 10:30, he states, "I and my Father are one." These statements have no parallel in the Synoptic Gospels. Nowhere in Matthew, Mark, or Luke does Jesus openly claim to be God. These statements are only found in John. Now, this raises a crucial question. If Jesus really preached his divinity so openly, why do the earlier Gospels fail to mention it? You would think that this would be the most important point that they could include in their Gospels, but they choose not to. Why? The most plausible explanation is that John's community had developed a new theological vision of Jesus, one that had transformed him from a human prophet into a divine being. Now let's discuss some of the miracles that we find in the book of John. Because in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus performs miracles to help people in need. But in John, miracles serve a very different purpose. They exist to prove Jesus' divine nature. Let's look at a few, starting with Jesus turning the water into wine, the famous story in John chapter 2. John calls this the first sign Jesus performed to reveal his glory. Then when Jesus heals the blind man in chapter 9, it's framed as a symbolic act, rather than simply healing this man. And a miracle found only in the book of John, the famous raising of Lazarus from the dead, John chapter 11. A dramatic display of Jesus' power over life and death. And strikingly, John actually omits other key miracles found in the Synoptic Gospels, such as casting out demons or healing Peter's mother-in-law and the feeding of the 4,000. This suggests that John was not merely reporting historical events, but he too was crafting a theological message, one that emphasized Jesus' divine power rather than his compassion. When you're reading the book of John, it becomes apparent very quickly that this is going to be very different from the Synoptic Gospels. In fact, John's Gospel does not align with the earlier accounts in many critical ways. Let's look at the cleansing of the temple. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus drives out the money changers, but he does that at the end of his ministry. In John, this event happens at the very beginning, in John chapter 2. Did it happen twice? That doesn't seem very likely. Let's look at another one though. How about the timing of Jesus' death? Now, we've mentioned in the other videos we've done about the Synoptic Gospels that Jesus is crucified after the Passover meal, right? But in John, Jesus is crucified before the meal, and it just so happens to be at the exact time when the Passover lambs were being sacrificed. We see this in John chapter 19 and verse 14. This change is deliberate. John wants to portray Jesus as the ultimate Passover sacrificial lamb, and he doesn't mind changing a few dates to make it happen. Another example is the length of Jesus' earthly ministry. The Synoptic Gospels suggest that it was simply a one-year ministry, but John's timeline extends it to at least 3 years, with multiple trips to Jerusalem. Now, these contradictions raise serious doubts about John's historical reliability. Again, if John was written by an eyewitness, why would it conflict so sharply with the earlier eyewitness accounts? It seems he has other goals in mind. Now, one of the most obvious differences in John is how Jesus speaks. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus teaches in short parables and proverbs. But in John, Jesus speaks in long theological monologues about himself. In order to compare, let's read a short, simple parable from Mark chapter 4, verse 30 to 32. And he said, "Whereunto shall we liken the kingdom of God? Or with what comparison shall we compare it? It is like a grain of a mustard seed, which when it is sown in the earth is less than all the seeds that be in the earth. But when it is sown, it groweth up, and becometh greater than all herbs, and shooteth out great branches, so that the fowl of the air may lodge under the shadow of it." A simple parable. Now let's compare that to Jesus' speaking style in John chapter 14, 6 through 10. Jesus saith unto him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If ye had known me, ye should have known my Father also, and from henceforth ye know him, and have seen him." Philip saith unto him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us." Jesus saith unto him, "Have I been so long with you, and yet hast thou not known me, Philip? He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou then, Show us the Father? Believest thou not that I am in the Father, and the Father in me? The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." You see the difference here? This style is wildly different, and it's a long self-declaration that Jesus is giving here. Now, the dramatic shift in style suggests that John's Jesus is not the historical Jesus, but a new theological reinterpretation. Now, let's shift our attention to the resurrection. John's resurrection story is far more detailed and dramatic than the earlier Gospels. John adds multiple post-resurrection appearances, including Jesus' personal conversation with Mary Magdalene. We find this in John chapter 20 and verse 11. Also, the story of doubting Thomas, who touches Jesus' wounds, also found in John chapter 20. And then we find in John 21 a lakeside breakfast with the disciples. John is also the only gospel to include the doubting Thomas story that reinforces the idea that Jesus' resurrection must be physically verified. Again, I have to ask, if these events really happened, why would they be missing from the earlier gospels? The most plausible answer is that these were later additions created by John to strengthen the Christian belief in the resurrection. So, when we critically examine the Gospel of John, we see that it presents a radically different Jesus. A Jesus who speaks like a Greek philosopher, not a Jewish rabbi. He performs miracles to prove his divinity rather than helping people. And he openly declares his divine status unlike in the Synoptic Gospels. And finally, he has a timeline that contradicts earlier accounts. So rather than preserving history, it seems that John's Gospel appears to be a theological expansion. It's designed to elevate Jesus into this new cosmic divine figure. There can be no question after reading the other Gospels that John has continued to embellish the story of Jesus for his own purposes, and isn't making any effort to provide us with a real historical account. I hope you've enjoyed diving into this level of detail on our 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But what about the book of Acts? Acts tells the story of the early church's growth, but is it an accurate history or another theological propaganda piece designed to unify Christianity? In our next video of our New Testament for Skeptics series, we'll uncover the hidden contradictions in Acts and reveal how it completely altered the story of early Christianity. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.